Dear ministers and delegates, dear Carole, dear Camille, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Mouvement Ecologique, Friends of the Earth Luxembourg, I am honored to welcome you in our beautiful home, nestled in this exceptional location. First, let me introduce myself with a small story. Once I entered the pub and a stranger came to me and said, "Lady, I like what you say and do, but I would never want to be married with you." Well, one of the reasons could be that I'm sometimes maybe a little bit straightforward, as generally people from the south of our country. So obviously this small introduction was to prepare you to a few rather direct words. I could tell you now that my grandfather was imprisoned in a concentration camp during World War II, but never spoke about it. And that for this and other reasons, I grew up with the conviction of the necessity of the European Union. Oh, that I spent, and that is true, my childhood 1 kilometer away from the home of the current president of the European Commission, and that his influence and his aura was such that I was breathed in the importance of Europe during my childhood. But I won't. Even though the great peacekeeping value of the European Union is undisputed, I believe that Europe needs an additional vision for the 21st century. And I am afraid to tell to you that the current European Union is, at present, no longer my Europe. The convictions of our ecological movement, and mine too, are based on the values of union of nations, a union with common democratic, ecological, human and social values, and an economic system that serves these values. But unfortunately, we have to admit that these values no longer seem to have the importance they deserve. Let me give you a few examples of our deep preoccupation. More than 2.3 million people signed the petition of a self-organized citizen initiative against CETA and TTIP. The quorum needed for a regular initiative is 1 million signatures, what we exceeded largely. And we have reached the country quorum in 17 countries, and we only needed 7. So what a unique success in Europe. But nevertheless, ignoring at this moment this clear statement of people, the opinion of scientists, universities, very large parts of civil society, over 500 NGOs through Europe, the European Commission pursues CETA and TTIP in a way undermining our democratic, social and ecological values. We know the answers of some of you to this statement. You say, we guarantee to you that all these values will be granted and that CETA and TTIP just support our economy. But we did read the CETA agreement, which is already prepared, and we read leaked reports of TTIP. And we got the conviction out of this analysis that the democratic, ecological and social values would be fundamentally eroded by CETA agreement like proposed and by TTIP like it is discussed at this moment. And in fact, I am honestly sure that most of those who support CETA and TTIP know this, but I think most of them just do not want to admit it. The promoters just have the conviction that, partly due to understandable geopolitical reasons, the price of the support of some economic actors is worthwhile reducing other common values. In fact, we think that they put the priority on the neoliberal market. 2 examples for this, but I could give hundreds. It is obvious that the protection of investments, as it is defined in CETA agreement and discussed in TTIP, will prevail over other ecological and social values, that an industry should become the right to seek compensation before a court for potential benefit loss because of national legislations and restrictions defined in it is not acceptable. The fact that the investor-state dispute settlement, ISDS, is still pursued, that it is planned to even build up a new kind of private court beside legal courts, calls into question our legal systems as well as our democratic values. And we all know that economic benefits aren't sure at all, and even Mrs. Malmström says so. And I am even convinced that a real democratic and public debate on a document of 1,500 pages, 1,500 pages like CETA is just not possible. And I would even think, I would ask now all of you who has read CETA, I do not know whether one of you could say, yes, I have read it. And it is not acceptable that new legislation, which will influence all social areas of our life, of millions of people all over the world, could be decided without a real debate. We, of course, are also in favor of a trade with the American states, no problem. A market that in fact is really very developed already at this moment. And we believe that investors should be reasonably protected. But CETA and TTIP, like discussed now, stand for a neoliberal market where the benefits of some industries dominate over the values that are the very foundation of Europe. Let me point it out very clearly. In fact, in some kind, on behalf of 2.3 million people, if you want to push CETA and TTIP, lots of people like me will lose their confidence to EU. Dear ministers and delegates, you represent the environmental interests in Europe. We trust you will be the defenders on behalf of all European ecological and social unions. Let me now take another theme that affects many people, biodiversity. You talked about it this morning. In Luxembourg, we finally bear the fruits. We really bear the fruits of EU legislation in the domain of nature protection. Without the EU, the loss of biodiversity, which is still very alarming, would even be worse. But luckily, we had and have the EU. And so, for example, some very rare birds have discovered Luxembourg, splendid nature's areas are protected, and so on. What a success story for the EU. And all of you, as environmental ministers and representatives, know that biodiversity protection bears real economic advantages. The calculation of the EU Commission says the loss of biodiversity costs every year 450 billion. The benefits of ecosystem service are estimated at 300 billion. 8 billion of jobs are safeguarded thanks to biodiversity. So let's go on. But nevertheless, the EU goes the way to do a so-called fitness check about nature directives. We all know that the aim of this fitness check is not nature protection, but a deregulation in favor of economic interests. I must admit that I feel a bit ashamed that this happens under a Luxembourgish president of the Commission. Yes, one always can do better in implementing European directives. But the nature directives themselves are efficient and must be respected. If you would accept any weakening, you would contribute to leaving a poor world to our children, and you would damage the economy. Let's collect the fruits of the work done over the last 30 years by many people, by the EU and member states. Please engage for strong nature directives. Please stop the fitness check, as over 100 environmental ONGs through Europe ask for. I started my little speech with the aim that the EU has to take over the key themes. And which other theme could be more important than climate change? The month of June was the hottest we ever had. The consequences of climate change are felt everywhere. In our countries, you all know it, we experience heat storms. Other countries, like Bangladesh, do really suffer. We, as environmental NGOs, know very well that in media and in surveys, climate change isn't the top topic anymore. But what is the reason? For us, the reason does not seem that the people are not concerned. It is rather a kind of self-protection. The climate change, if we cannot limit it, would have such dramatic consequences that a quite normal human reflex is to close the eyes towards such dramatic consequences. A little bit like a little child thinks that if she closes the eyes, doesn't see itself anymore and hopes that all will be better. But we all know that is not true. So you will all be sitting in Paris for the climate summit. We urge you with all our passion to decide on a roadmap towards a $100 billion by 2020, to work with other developed and developing country partners on climate finance post-2020, to maximize the reform of the EU ETS and dedicate revenues to the Green Climate Fund, to use the Paris Agreement to help shift the trillions and phase out fossil fuel subsidies. Climate change has to be a priority. A last point, I come to the end. I know that the economic situation in other countries is very different and cannot be compared to our country. But nevertheless, we have to discuss about economic growth, welfare, well-being. What that does mean, what do they mean in the future? We all know that our ecological footprint is not bearable anymore, not sustainable for next generations, and that unlimited growth is not possible on a limited planet. Why do we pursue such an illusion? It is not comprehensible. We have to build up a more equal economic system with the so-called developing countries. We know that we have to discuss our future economic model, but we don't do it at the right way this moment. We have to consider much more that all analyses show that the key points for welfare are solidarity, social relations, participation rights. These are the criteria for people's happiness, not maximizing material goods and economic growth, which has become an end in itself. So let's talk about an economy that responds to these common values of the EU and that respects nature limits. What an exciting challenge. Allow me to conclude my short speech. Do not sacrifice EU basic values for some sort economic interest. People expect from all of you a Europe that rests on common values of solidarity, well-being, democracy. That is why generations of people have been committed themselves for hundreds of years. Those values could even be basic for young people to identify more and to engage more in Europe. This would be our and my Europe. And in a way, we are on a turning point. Let's take the right direction and tell people to regain confidence that EU is not a neoliberal building, but a building of human values. We, as NGOs, invest our power, our creativity, our commitment for a sustainable future, like you also. I thank you very much.